Hello and welcome to the Retire Once Show, the show designed to help you get to retirement, but most importantly, stay retired. I'm your host, Johnathan Rankin. I'm the founder and CEO of Theorem Wealth Management, and I'm joined, as always, by my lovely co-host.
Hi, I'm Melissa Rankin. Thank you for joining us. Today we have a great episode in store for you. We're going to be talking about the 5 top things that you need to do to make sure you are ready to retire.
That's right. And before we jump into those 5 things, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, join us on this retirement paradise that we're building. We come out with a new episode every single week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. And
you never want to miss it.
Never want to miss it. And, maybe share it with your friend, your neighbor.
Share it with everybody you come in contact with.
There we go.
Tell everybody.
Tell everybody. So let's jump into those 5 things, Mel.
So what we found is that it really does come down to the 5 things. And we think that it kind of starts with your money.
Yeah.
So the number one thing, income needs.
You got to figure out how much money do you actually need to retire. Now, a lot of people think, let's just take my pre-retirement budget and let's just push that into retirement and we're good. And the reality is people need to just take a second, take a few minutes and actually sit down and think about what does retirement really look like for them? What are they envisioning they want to do?
Well, and I mean, more than that even, it comes down to what does your day-to-day look like? I mean, are you going to be eating at home? Are you going to be going out more? Are you going to be entertaining more?
Yeah, a lot of people talk about they want to travel more during retirement. What does that really look like? And starting to come up with the activities that you're going to do during retirement, because that's a separate line item that you're probably not spending today if you're still working. So coming up with what retirement looks like for you will help you determine that income need, because you've got that additional activity budget, we'll say. You've got your living expenses. You got to factor in healthcare at some point.
Absolutely.
If you're younger than 65 years old, well, you got to figure out how are you going to bridge to Medicare. If you're over 65, try to plan for Medicare costs and any supplemental insurance that you might have. So once you figure out your day-to-day living expenses, so what does it take to keep the lights on and keep food on the table? What is your activity expense level going to be? So travel, social stuff, day-to-day additional living expenses, and then your healthcare expenses. All of that combined, there you go. Now you've got your income need, but then what do we got to do?
Well, I mean, once you get the income out of the way, or not out of the way, I mean, it'd be nice if it was just gone and out of sight. But once you have an idea of exactly what you're going to need, next you have to think about how you're going to fund those needs, your income streams.
Yep. So that brings us to step number 2, figuring out your income streams. Now, a lot of people want to talk about Social Security. Now, we've done episodes on Social Security before. You can check those out. But you do have to figure out what your Social Security strategy is going to be depending on the age you're retiring. If you are retiring before full retirement age, do you take it early? Do you delay it? Do you wait till 70? Factoring in if you're married, the spousal consideration there. So there's a lot of things to factor in with Social Security. We're not going to dive into all of those today, but that all goes into figuring out your income streams. So creating that Social Security plan is important. If you don't know where to start, feel free to schedule some time with us. We'd be happy to help walk you through that. There's a link in the description below, but creating that Social Security strategy, that's part of figuring out your income streams.
What are the other parts? You've
got your pension. A lot of people that are retiring today, they still likely have a pension. Now, I don't know anybody our age that has pensions, but there's a lot of people
But a lot of people still do.
They do. And figuring out a pension strategy to maximize that. You've got a couple different options. A lot of companies allow you to take a lump sum. So should you do that, or should you take the lifetime payment? And if you're taking a lifetime payment, if you're married, do you take it with joint and survivor? Do you take it just single life? Which do you take to maximize that pension for your retirement? So you've got Social Security strategy, pension strategy, and then you've got to figure out if you have any other streams of income. Do you have rental property, or nowadays it's popular to have Airbnbs, so do you have any other income streams? Because you want to add all those up, and that will help you figure out how much is left over that you need your portfolio to fund that retirement. So figuring out those income streams is that second step in that 5-step process to make sure that you are retirement ready.
Because like we said, first you've got to figure out what you're going to need money-wise. Then you've got to figure out how you're going to get it. I mean,
that leads us to step number 3, figuring out if your portfolio is sustainable for the rest of your life. So you've got the income streams that you've put together, and now there's a difference that has to be made up with your portfolio. So how do you know whether or not that difference is going to make you run out of money, or is it going to be sustainable for the rest of your life? So there's a few different ways that you can figure out if your withdrawal rate is sustainable. Now,
I think the most important one, I mean, aside from just taking the steps in the first place, because that's a big deal. Kudos on doing that if you already have. If not, again, we're here to help you with that. But the Monte Carlo simulation, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, we get a lot of people who ask, can I just use the 4% rule? We've heard of that, and we've done episodes on that where, whether or not it's the 4% rule or the 4.5%, or, it kind of keeps changing. But Monte Carlo simulation is something that has been pretty popular over the past, I would say, 20 years, maybe a little bit more than that, in terms of determining whether or not someone is going to have a successful retirement. And so I think we want to look at, what is Monte Carlo simulation?
I was just going to say, I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, let's take it back a step and explain exactly what that is.
Yeah, so Monte Carlo simulation, it's a model that is used to predict the likelihood of success of certain outcomes. So what will happen is,
it's your Vegas odds, if you will.
Hopefully they're a lot better than Vegas odds. So what happens is you take your asset allocation. And your asset allocation is the mix of different asset classes you have. So you might have stocks, you might have bonds, you might have other assets within your portfolio. And each one of those assets has a different characteristics. They have different historical returns, different risk profiles. So you take that and you couple your withdrawal rate with that, and you run it through thousands of scenarios of market cycles. And that will give you a probability of success to say you are called 80%, likely to not run out of money.
Which sounds pretty good.
That sounds pretty good. Now, most people shoot for a 70 to 80% likelihood of success. Obviously, we'd all like to see 100%.
Or at least 90. I mean, somewhere in that A range.
Yeah, so somewhere up there. I guess if we're using school grades, even though we're talking to people who haven't been in school in, 40 years?
You're assuming that.
I'm assuming that. That's true. I apologize about the assumption there. But there is new research that is from kitsis.com, and we're going to link to that in the show notes here. It's a really interesting research piece where they actually discuss why a 50% probability of success actually isn't too bad.
Okay, 50-50 shot. Doesn't sound great.
I mean, could you imagine if you told someone, okay, you have a 1 in 2% chance that your retirement's going to fail?
Which actually, I think, aren't those the marriage and divorce statistics also? Isn't that a
I don't
isn't that
know.
a thing?
Why is she thinking about this, folks?
Well, no, I mean, because if you think about it, it's like people with 50% knowing that.
That's true.
People still get married.
That's a good point. I didn't know where she was going with that one. So, yeah.
I'm trying to be a little more positive.
Yeah, a lot more positive in our last episode where she was talking about your deteriorating health. But
I'm a realist. So, again, that's why I feel like we have to bring it back to, I don't know, something that people can relate it to. Just don't be discouraged by a 50% rating.
That's true, because in Monte Carlo simulation, failure is actually defined by depleting someone's assets without funding all of their goals. But the reality is that doesn't necessarily mean that retirement is a failure. So, they point out there's a scenario that they run, and it's a very detailed article, and I'll just kind of give you an example from that. Imagine you are retiring and you need $100,000 to live off of. And with your Social Securities and your pensions, you're able to make $85,000 of that $100,000. So you need to make up $15,000 every single year and add inflation there. But what if your portfolio runs out of money? Is it really a failure for retirement to live off of $85,000 versus that $100,000 that you needed? Is that really a failure? Because a lot of people can make an adjustment there.
You can change your budget.
Yeah, and that's what they talk about, is that it's not a probability of success. It's a probability that you need to make adjustments at some point.
Which makes sense. I mean, it kind of goes back to being realistic about your budget in the first place.
Yeah, we've talked to people before who said, hey, I'm working with an advisor, and they told me that I only have a 35% likelihood of success in retirement. Is that true?
Okay, that's not great. I mean,
yeah, can you validate that? But running it through that, you might hear someone say, okay, you're 50% probability of success, which means you can either delay retirement or reduce your budget now. But instead, the conversation should really be, okay, there's a 50% probability that you're going to have to make adjustments at some point in retirement in the future.
Not that you're going to fail, just that you need to kind of account for that failure, so to speak.
Yeah, at some point you're going to have to make spending cuts. depending on market returns, at some point you're going to have to make those spending cuts. And if you're okay knowing that today, then yeah, go ahead and retire. But if you say, okay, I don't want to make spending cuts, well, then yeah, delay retirement. So that's really the only other option.
You just have to be realistic about it.
Yeah. And not only that, not only about being realistic, but it goes back to what we always talk about, consistently updating your retirement plan. Because if you're just doing it today and you're retiring, even with a 70% probability of success, well, if we go through some sort of bear market, maybe that changes that. If you're not updating that, you don't really know if you need to make those adjustments or not. So that's really step one in that determining whether or not your withdrawal rate is successful, or not necessarily successful, but sustainable. The step number two is you got to build a portfolio that actually supports that withdrawal rate. So if it is 4 or 5%, building out a proper portfolio to support that is important. And I think that's really important right now as we're going through a market that has sold off. At least it's recovered a little bit, but it's still in, somewhere near bear market territory. And the reality is a lot of people get nervous and they say, okay, let me just sit in cash. Let me just hold off, or let me sell everything.
Pull out completely.
Yeah. And long term, that's not going to support anybody's withdrawal rate for the most part, unless you only need a 1 or 2% withdrawal rate for the rest of your life.
Which is probably not the case for most.
Yeah. So building out that portfolio that fits your risk tolerance and making sure that it supports your withdrawal rate, really that's all goes into step number 3, which is making sure that your portfolio can sustain your entire retirement.
Which leads us to step number 4, estate planning. This is something that we actually feel very strongly about. I mean, we kind of went in order of the way we think it should go with the steps, but this one, if we could put a ding, ding, ding around it or a star or something, this is actually a really important one, estate planning.
It is. And it's something that almost everybody I talk to just wants to put off. Nobody wants to have the conversation about estate planning.
Nobody wants to plan their death.
No, you don't. And the reality is, when we did ours, they said, okay, here's a sheet, plan your funeral. And
yeah, it was a very grim day, if you will.
Now, I would like this on record, and so everybody could witness, because if something happens to Melissa, she has it in there where she wants playing at her funeral. What song?
Another One Bites the Dust.
Another One Bites the Dust. This is not made up. This is exactly the song that she would like playing at her funeral. So now that that's on record.
As dark as that is, it's something that, it's important for your spouse or whoever's going to be helping out along the way to know that kind of stuff.
It is. And so it's a good practice to just get that out of the way before you go into retirement, because nobody really thinks about that stuff when they're in retirement. You probably have other plans, probably immediate travel plans, or spending time with family.
Have fun.
You
just retired. You want to go live the good life.
And not only that, but a lot of companies nowadays, especially large corporations, they offer legal benefits in their benefits plan. So now that open enrollment's coming around the corner, that might be something you might want to look at, because last I checked, it was $8 or $12 a month or something like that. And that benefit usually will cover setting up a basic estate plan. And so putting that together, getting that out of the way to figure out if something happens to you, what happens to your money.
And not just your money.
That's true.
If you've got, grandkids, there's a little more to it. It's a little more involved than just, this is where your money will go. It's,
That's true. There are other pieces.
Your belongings.
Well, I was trying to simplify it, but yes, it's your belongings and it's all your stuff.
He brings it back to money every time, but it's a little more in depth, we'll say.
You're right. It is a little more in depth, but that is step number 4. And it's important to just get that out of the way, especially while you're working. So try to do that before you retire, because look at all of this as like a checklist. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4. That was the 4th step. And now we're on to number 5.
So that leads us into, it's actually kind of a great segue to it, because number 5 is your social strategy. And we don't mean like, how often are you on Facebook or, something like that, Instagram. We mean, what does your social kind of isolation look like? There are some crazy statistics out there about what happens when somebody retires.
Yeah. And we've all heard this kind of anecdotal evidence of so-and-so retired and then just immediately passed away a couple of months or years right after retirement. And so there have been studies to look at, why does this happen? Well, a lot of it has to do with social isolation. And I saw a statistic that said that social isolation has as high of health risk as, was it, smoking 15 cigarettes a day and obesity. So
oh my goodness,
that's not good. So there's actually,
I love how he says it like a news anchor. That's not good.
and now, see, that's where we're supposed to bring in the next topic, the next positive topic. But there was actually a study done, you know how much I love my surveys and studies, on Shell oil retirees. And what they found is that for those who retired before 62, they actually had a higher mortality rate than people who retired at 65. And so there was other studies done. Social Security actually found the same thing, that men who retired at 62 have a 20% higher likelihood of death than the general population. So why? Why is that the case? Well, there's a research study on that one too.
I mean, I think it kind of goes to, not that you're retired or we're retired, but it makes sense kind of to me, because it's like on a weekend where, I mean, no offense, but this is where you might hang out and watch football or something, whereas I use the weekend to get all of my like to-dos done. But he's like, oh, good, I'll relax now. So it kind of makes sense that men are more likely to become sedentary.
That is true. And just so you know, it is very true in the study. This only applies to men. It doesn't apply to women in the study for some reason. So guys, if you're watching,
the reason is right there.
That's part of it, I guess. But there was actual research done. Maria Fitzpatrick of Cornell with the National Bureau of Economic Research actually found that it's because people's lifestyle choices change and they actually get unhealthier, especially for men. Retirees that are male typically become more sedentary, often watch more TV. They actually smoke more and drink more. So doing less, smoking more, drinking more, probably not a recipe for longevity there.
For a fulfilled retirement, long life.
Yeah, so you want to figure out, okay, what are you actually going to do socially, and how do you surround yourself with things that are going to fulfill you? A lot of people worked for companies throughout their career to get themselves ready to retire. That was surrounded by other people that had that engagement. And when you go to retire, after the first few months, you kind of go, no one here. It's kind of like the episode that we did with Matt Moline, who wrote that book on
empty nest.
Yeah, empty nesters.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which, I mean, it kind of makes sense, especially if you're retiring before, say, your spouse, because then you're going from being surrounded by people or having constant communication and interaction to really just maybe waiting for the other one to get home every day. You're hanging out on the porch. I mean,
yeah, so you want to figure out, are you busy during retirement, or are you actually fulfilled? And figuring out things that you can do.
Those are two different things.
They really are. And there are things that you can do. You can find places to volunteer. You can do part-time work. I know we're talking about retirement and not going back to work, but for some, part-time work is actually fulfilling and fun. Get more active, things like yoga or exercise. I would prefer exercise over yoga any day of the week, but
even just going for a walk. I mean, little things. It doesn't have to be some grand thing. I mean, you are in retirement, but just stay active. It's important.
Stay active and then stay social with friends and family, and scheduling those things out, making sure you have things on the calendar where you're surrounding yourself with other people. And going back to what Melissa said, social media is a good place to start if you don't really know where to start to get socially involved, but try to get out in the world and figure out how to get social, because this might not sound like it's part of retirement, but this is a very big part of retirement. And there's a lot of studies done about the drop-off of fulfillment and happiness in retirement because of that. So
it's a huge adjustment. I mean, you go from every day, you're going to see 10, 15 people, whatever, and you probably have close friends that you work with. I mean, it kind of all plays a role in retirement.
I have a close friend that I work with too. She is my co-host, and we are happy that you are here. So those are the 5 things. And that last one, I think, is really important, that often is forgotten. But make sure that you go through those 5 steps before you're even ready to hit that retirement button. Go use it like a checklist. Did you knock out all these things? We also do have the retirement toolkit that you could download. I'm going to link to that in the show notes as well. Make sure you check that out so you can be fully prepared and ready to retire. And that way, you have nothing that you've overlooked, nothing that you forgot, and that you've crossed every T and dotted every I. That's the saying, right?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure I got that right. And before we get out of here, what do we want everybody to do?
We want you to subscribe. We want you to tell everybody you know.
That's
That's part of the being social.
That is, be social and tell all of your friends that you watch this. And this is the only thing you need to be, really sedentary in watching. And you can watch it on your phone, or you can listen to us while you're on a walk through some sort of podcast
Enjoying
platform.
nature.
There you go. So those are the things we want you to do. Hit that subscribe button. Download that retirement toolkit. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to have a conversation. There's going to be a link to schedule some time with us. With that, I am Johnathan Rankin.
I'm Melissa Rankin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.